General Richard Shirreff, a former NATO Deputy Supreme Commander, has pointed to a specific date, November 3rd. He warns that on that day, a single spark in the Baltics could unleash a chain of events leading to war between NATO and Russia. A date is on the calendar, and the countdown has already begun. On November 3rd, according to retired NATO Commander Richard Shirreff, the spark could come from the Baltics. He describes how a sudden blackout in Lithuania might trigger panic, martial law, and a cascade of events forcing NATO to decide whether to invoke Article 5 against Russia. This is not a line from a novel, it is a warning from someone who once held one of the highest commands in the alliance. In this video, we will break down Shirreff's scenario, then compare it to what is actually happening right now on NATO's eastern flank. Russian fighter jets crossing into Estonian airspace, drones forcing airports in Scandinavia to shut down, cyber attacks testing Europe's critical systems. We will analyze why Moscow is escalating in this way, how NATO is responding, and what choices Washington would face if the scenario turned real. And this matters directly to you. If NATO is tested in the Baltics, American pilots and American troops are already in the line of fire. Energy prices, cyber disruptions, and military commitments would ripple straight into American homes. If you want clear analysis beyond the headlines, subscribe to Safety Zone and stay with us until the end. Because the countdown to November 3rd is not just a number, it is a question about how fragile the line between deterrence and war has become. General Richard Shirreff, who once served as NATO's Deputy Supreme Allied Commander Europe, has not spoken in vague warnings. He has given a date, November 3rd. His scenario begins with a sudden and unexplained blackout in Lithuania. Lights cut out across cities, trains halt on their tracks, hospitals switch to emergency power. Within hours, similar outages ripple into Latvia and Estonia. Streets fill with confusion, social media lights up with panic, and governments scramble to restore order. By nightfall, martial law is declared, not because leaders want it, but because systems have already started to break down. According to Shirreff, this is the moment Moscow seizes. In Kaliningrad, Russian forces go on high alert. State media accuses NATO of staging provocations, and before dawn, limited strikes are launched just across the Lithuanian border, probing defenses and daring the alliance to respond. For the first time since NATO's founding, Article 5, the promise that an attack on one is an attack on all, would be on the line. The scenario then turns to politics. Shirreff suggests that Washington itself could hesitate, calculating the risks of escalation with a nuclear power and weighing whether the Baltics are worth a war. He imagines hesitation at the very top, a delay in decision-making that would fracture NATO unity and embolden Moscow. In his chain of events, days, not weeks, separate blackout from bombardment and decisions in Washington from the fate of Europe. What makes this scenario gripping is not just the map or the mechanics, but the clock. Shirreff does not talk about some distant decade or abstract possibility. He talks about November 3rd, a date that makes the question unavoidable. If the lights went out in the Baltics that night, how would NATO respond, and what would America really do? The scenario Shirreff laid out may seem extreme, but reality is already nudging in that direction. In recent days, 3 Russian MiG-31 fighter jets crossed into Estonian airspace without filing a flight plan. They switched off their transponders, making themselves invisible to civilian radar, and remained inside NATO skies for 12 minutes before being intercepted by Italian F-35s. Estonia immediately triggered consultations under Article 4, calling the violation unacceptable and demanding collective attention from the alliance. According to Reuters, Moscow denied any wrongdoing, insisting the jets flew over neutral waters. That denial fits a familiar pattern. Assert power, deny intent, and leave NATO to handle the ambiguity. This was not an isolated act. Only days earlier, Poland reported a swarm of over 20 Russian drones crossing its airspace. Several were shot down by NATO aircraft, others crashed, but the sheer scale was unprecedented. Warsaw described it as a large-scale provocation and also invoked Article 4. The sequence is hard to ignore. Drones first, jets next, escalation in measured increments rather than a single dramatic strike. Each step raises the risk without crossing the line into open war. And the pressure is not confined to borders. A new front has opened in Europe's skies: civil aviation. In Copenhagen, unidentified drones forced the main airport to close for nearly 4 hours. According to Danish police, the drones were not hobby toys, but flown by a skilled operator, hovering at altitude and even flashing their lights on and off before disappearing. Hundreds of flights were delayed or diverted with knock-on effects across Scandinavia. Oslo experienced a similar scare, and both governments raised the alarm about possible foreign involvement. At the same time, European airports faced something even harder to intercept: cyber attacks. Ransomware crippled check-in and boarding systems at Heathrow, Berlin, and Brussels, forcing airlines to fall back on manual procedures. Passengers found themselves stranded in terminals while technicians raced to contain the breach. According to Reuters, this was not the first such attack, but the coordination across multiple hubs suggested a deliberate attempt to test aviation's weakest points. Cheap drones and malicious code achieved what missiles and bombs would normally do: shut down travel, spread confusion, and erode public confidence. Taken together, these are not isolated headlines. They are strands of the same rope tightening around Europe's security. Fighter incursions probing the alliance's borders. Drone provocations shutting down airports. Cyber disruptions cascading through critical systems. Each one tests NATO's readiness, its unity, and its ability to respond quickly under pressure. And when you place Shirreff's scenario over this unfolding reality, the frame begins to look less like fiction and more like a warning. The question is not whether a blackout in the Baltics could happen, it is whether the alliance is ready when the next spark, accidental or deliberate, sets the stage. Russia's strategy in these provocations is not random. It is the method of controlled chaos. Push into NATO airspace for minutes, send drones over major cities, unleash cyber attacks that leave no fingerprints. Each move tests two things at once: how fast NATO reacts and how divided allies become under pressure. The Kremlin thrives on deniability, claiming exercises, mistakes, or rogue operators, but the effect is cumulative. Every violation shifts the baseline, turning the abnormal into the expected. Yet Moscow's calibration has its own risks. A fighter jet crossing into Estonia might intend only to test, but what happens if NATO interceptors misread the maneuver? A drone over Copenhagen may be designed as a signal, but what if it collides with a commercial aircraft? The danger is not that Russia plans an immediate full-scale assault. It is that the margin for miscalculation narrows with each probe. NATO, for its part, has tried to close that margin. After the Estonian airspace breach, the North Atlantic Council met under Article 4, reaffirming unity and warning that Allied skies will be defended by all necessary means. According to AP News, Secretary General Jens Stoltenberg underscored that any repeat incursions would trigger proportionate but firm responses, a phrase that signals deterrence without promising escalation. Poland has gone further, announcing it will preemptively shoot down drones or aircraft that violate its airspace, citing national security and the need to prevent normalization of provocations. The response is layered deterrence, rapid intercepts in the air, public warnings at the political level, and the repositioning of forces under Operation Eastern Sentry along NATO's eastern flank. According to Reuters, NATO has already increased air patrols and cyber defense postures, linking them as part of one broader shield. The message is clear: hybrid warfare will not be allowed to slip under the radar. Still, a question hangs over every announcement. Is the alliance unified enough to turn deterrence into action if Shirreff's scenario, or something close to it, materializes? For the United States, Shirreff's scenario forces a choice that cuts to the core of American strategy. If Russian forces cross into Lithuania, if Article 5 is invoked, Washington cannot hide behind ambiguity. The treaty is clear. But politics, risks, and perceptions complicate the picture. Two paths emerge, and both carry heavy consequences. In the first path, America responds decisively. U.S. pilots already stationed in Poland and the Baltics take to the skies under NATO command. Additional brigades deploy from Germany and from bases across the continental United States. Warships move into the Baltic Sea while Cyber Command raises shields, countering Russian malware with retaliatory strikes designed to blind enemy systems. The message is unmistakable. NATO stands by its promise, and America leads. In this version, Moscow faces immediate deterrence. But Americans at home also face the cost. Gasoline climbs within days, just as it did when the Colonial Pipeline was shut down for less than a week. Markets reel under the fear of escalation, and retirement accounts shrink overnight. Families with loved ones in uniform brace for deployments that are no longer rotations but combat tours. Employers lose workers to mobilization. National Guard units leave gaps at home, and communities feel the strain. The benefit is credibility. The cost is blood and treasure. The second path is hesitation. Shirreff imagines Washington pausing, calculating whether the Baltics are worth the risk of nuclear escalation. Perhaps the White House delays a military order, or Congress fractures over whether to act. In this scenario, days slip by, and NATO's unity begins to crack. European leaders question whether Article 5 means what it says. Moscow exploits the doubt, advancing incrementally and daring the alliance to catch up. For Americans, the impact of hesitation is not peace, it is vulnerability. If NATO fails, adversaries from Tehran to Beijing read the lesson. America's guarantees are conditional. That lesson could invite challenges in the Middle East, in Taiwan, or even in cyberspace targeting U.S. infrastructure. Imagine ransomware shutting down hospitals, ports, and banks, not in Tallinn, but in Texas. Hesitation abroad could invite chaos at home. Then comes the third and darkest possibility, one Shirreff sketches as a real fracture. What if the United States pulls back altogether, choosing restraint over alliance solidarity? Imagine NATO without its cornerstone. Europe would scramble to fill the vacuum with limited means, while Russia would surge to expand its sphere. American credibility would collapse overnight. The world would not wait for Washington to reconsider. China could test its strength in the Taiwan Strait, Iran could push harder against Israel, and North Korea could gamble on provocation. For U.S. citizens, the shock would arrive not only in foreign policy journals, but at the gas station, in the grocery aisle, and in the safety of communities suddenly exposed to cyber attacks with no buffer of collective defense. Retirement savings would swing with market collapse. Energy bills would spike. Pharmacies would run short of imported medicine. The message would be clear. America is no longer the anchor of order, and ordinary Americans would feel the consequences in daily life. This is the dilemma. Lead decisively and pay the price. Hesitate and risk the alliance itself. Step back entirely and invite a global unraveling. Which path would America take if November 3rd unfolds as Shirreff warns? And more importantly, which path would you want it to take? The date November 3rd may or may not carry the weight that General Richard Shirreff assigns to it. What matters is not the calendar, but the pattern. In the span of days, we have seen Russian jets push into NATO skies, drones disrupt Europe's busiest airports, and cyber attacks grind systems to a halt. Each act alone could be dismissed as an incident. Taken together, they are signals. Signals that the space between peace and war is no longer measured in years, but in hours. For the United States, the lesson is not to fear a prophecy. It is to recognize the fragility of the order that has kept war away from American soil for more than 200 years. Strength is not only measured in divisions and missiles, but in the clarity of commitments and the resilience of societies. When allies believe the United States will stand firm, deterrence holds. When they doubt, deterrence crumbles. The brilliance of Shirreff's scenario is not the date, it is the mirror it holds up. Are we ready for a world where provocations multiply, where hybrid tactics blur the line, and where decisions in Washington echo instantly in Warsaw, Tallinn, and Vilnius? Are we prepared for the fact that hesitation can be as dangerous as aggression? The countdown to November 3rd is not about predicting the future. It is about asking whether America and the alliance it leads can adapt before the sparks already flying become the fire no one can stop. So here is the question for you. If American pilots were forced to fire on Russian jets over the Baltics, would you support triggering Article 5 and standing by NATO without hesitation, or would you push for restraint to avoid escalation? Share your thoughts in the comments and subscribe to